Close your eyes. Take a slow breath in and let it go. You are not here. Not in this room, not in this time. You are somewhere very old and very still. You are standing in Egypt. Not the Egypt of movies and noise, but the real Egypt, the quiet one. The one that most people never stop long enough to feel. It is just before dawn. The sky is the color of deep indigo, holding its breath before the sun arrives. The air is cool and dry, and it smells faintly of incense that was burned hours ago and still lingers, soft as a whisper, between the great stone columns of the temple. Everything is still. And then, slowly, so slowly you almost miss it, the first thin line of gold appears on the eastern horizon. The day has begun, and in ancient Egypt, someone is already watching. In the great temple complexes of Karnak, of Luxor, of Memphis, there were priests whose only responsibility, whose sacred and solemn duty, was to track the passage of time. Not to rush it, not to fill it, just to watch it move, to observe the slow arc of the sun across the sky, to listen to the steady, patient drip of water through stone, to measure the slow glide of shadows across ancient limestone. Tonight, we are going to join them. We are going to slow down, breathe deeply, and let the long, unhurried hours of ancient Egypt carry you gently towards sleep. This is a story about time, but more than that, it is a story about what it felt like to live without hurry, to move at the pace of shadows, to trust that the hours would pass, one by one, as they always had. The ancient Egyptians had a word, actually, two words for time. The first was Djet. Djet meant time as eternity, time without end. The kind of time that gods lived in. The slow, circular turning of the stars. The flooding of the Nile that came every year, reliable as breathing. The sun that rose every morning, just as it had for 10,000 years before, and would for 10,000 years after. Djet was not something you measured. It simply was. The second word was Neheh. Neheh was the time of the living world, the hours of the day, the seasons, the years of a pharaoh's reign. These were countable, measurable. These were the units a scribe needed to record the history of a kingdom. But here is something remarkable. The ancient Egyptians did not experience these two kinds of time as opposites. For them, every sunrise was both ordinary and eternal. Every shadow that crossed a temple floor was part of an infinite cycle. The present moment was always happening within the vast, unhurried embrace of forever. When you understand this, you begin to understand why the Egyptians approached timekeeping the way they did. They were not trying to conquer time or race against it. They were simply trying to be present within it, to mark its passing, to honor it, to watch it move slowly like a shadow on stone. The earliest timekeeping device the ancient Egyptians used was not a machine at all. It was a stone. A very tall, very specific stone. The obelisk. You have seen pictures of them, those tall, narrow, four-sided towers of granite or sandstone, tapering to a small pyramid at the top. They stand at the entrances to temples. They now stand in Rome, in Paris, in New York's Central Park, carried away by later empires who recognized that they were sacred, impressive, worth keeping. But in ancient Egypt, an obelisk was more than a monument. It was a calendar, a clock, a scientific instrument of remarkable precision. Here is how it worked. As the sun rose each morning, the obelisk's shadow fell long and dark across the stone courtyard. It stretched out to the west long, slow, reaching. In those early morning hours, the shadow was at its longest, and it moved almost imperceptibly. If you stood very still and watched the tip of that shadow, you could see it creeping, millimeter by millimeter, across the stone. As the morning progressed, the shadow shortened. The sun climbed higher. The shadow pulled back toward the base of the obelisk, retreating slowly, the way the tide retreats from a shore, not in a rush, but in a long, unhurried withdrawal. At noon, when the sun was at its highest point directly overhead, the shadow was at its very shortest. It pooled around the base of the obelisk like a dark collar of stone. Then, in the afternoon, the process reversed. The shadow began to grow again, this time stretching eastward. Longer, 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 until at dusk it reached its full extent, and the sun sank below the western horizon. Egyptian priests and scribes had marked the stone courtyard around their temple obelisks with lines and measurements. A shadow falling across a certain line meant a certain hour, a certain month, a certain season. They didn't need any machine to tell them what time it was. They just had to watch the shadow move. Slowly, patiently, like a needle crossing a vast stone sundial. The oldest known obelisk still standing in Egypt dates to around 1950 BCE, that is nearly 4,000 years ago. Carved from a single piece of red granite, placed at Heliopolis, the city of the sun. Even then, obelisks were already ancient technology. Historians believe the Egyptians had been using large upright stones to track time for centuries before that. Perhaps millennia. Think about that. For thousands upon thousands of years, human beings woke in the morning, looked at the shadow on the stone, and simply knew. Not from a screen, not from an alarm, from the slow, reliable movement of the sun. There is something deeply settling about that thought. Something that makes the body want to relax. Let that settle with you now. As remarkable as the great temple obelisks were, they had one significant limitation. You could not carry one with you. And so, the ancient Egyptians invented something smaller. The shadow clock. A shadow clock known in Egyptian as a sebet was a portable timekeeping device. Simple in its genius. It consisted of a flat horizontal bar with a raised crosspiece at one end. When you placed it so the crosspiece faced east in the morning, the crosspiece cast a shadow along the length of the bar. Markings on the bar, 5 marks in total, divided the morning into time intervals. At noon, you would turn the device so the crosspiece faced west, and the afternoon would be measured in the same way. These devices were used by Egyptian officials, military commanders, and priests. They were carved from wood or stone. Some were beautifully decorated, painted with hieroglyphs and religious symbols that connected the mundane task of timekeeping to the sacred movement of the sun, god Ra, across the sky. Even more precise was the Merkhet. The Merkhet was not exactly a shadow clock. It was something closer to a surveying tool, used in combination with a palm rib called a bay. Together, they formed a sighting instrument. A priest would align the Merkhet with a fixed star on the northern horizon, usually the North Star, which the Egyptians called the indestructible one because it never seemed to move, and then use it to track the passage of the night hours. By watching which stars crossed the meridian, the imaginary line running directly overhead from north to south, Egyptian astronomers could divide the night into 12 segments. This is where our 12 nighttime hours come from. The Egyptians noticed that across a year, different stars rose and set at different times. By identifying 12 specific stars, they called them the Deccan stars, and tracking when each one rose on the eastern horizon just before dawn, they could mark the progression of the night into 12 equal parts. And because they had 12 hours of night, it made sense to have 12 hours of day. 24 hours total. That number 24 did not come from convenience or coincidence. It came from the careful observation of Egyptian astronomers lying on their backs in the warm desert night, watching the stars drift slowly overhead, counting. Always counting. Patient, methodical, unhurried. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, those same stars are still crossing the same sky. The same celestial mechanics that an Egyptian astronomer watched 4,000 years ago are still at work. Still turning. Still counting. You are part of that same long, slow story. All of the devices we have discussed so far shared a common limitation. They required sunlight. An obelisk shadow means nothing after dark. A shadow clock is useless when clouds cover the sky. And even the Merkhet required clear skies and visible stars. But the temples never slept. Rituals continued through the night. Priests carried out ceremonies in the deep, dark hours. Offerings were made. Prayers were spoken. Time had to be tracked even when the sun was gone. And so, the Egyptians invented something even more beautiful. The water clock. Known in Greek as the Clepsydra, meaning water thief. In Egyptian, it was simply called an outflow clock. The design was elegant in its simplicity. Take a stone vessel, usually carved from alabaster or granite, about the size of a large cooking pot. Cut a small hole near the base. Fill the vessel with water. Now watch. The water will begin to drip through the hole. Slowly, steadily, one drop at a time. As the water level drops inside the vessel, it will pass by marks carved into the interior wall. 12 marks for each season of the year, corresponding to the 12 hours of the night. When the water level reached each mark, an hour had passed. The oldest surviving Egyptian water clock dates to approximately 1400 BCE, the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, whose court also oversaw the construction of the Colossi of Memnon and parts of the Great Temple of Luxor. This clock is now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and it is a thing of quiet beauty. It is made of alabaster, slightly translucent in places, as if the stone itself is remembering the water that once filled it. The inside is carved with hieroglyphs and astronomical symbols. The marks for the 12 night hours are etched with precision. Imagine the hands of the craftsman who made it. Patient, careful, working by lamplight in a stone-cutting workshop 3,400 years ago, chiseling each mark with deliberate care, knowing that when this clock was finished, it would go into a temple. It would serve the gods. It would track the passage of sacred time through countless dark, silent nights. That clock survived. It is still here. The craftsman is gone. The pharaoh is gone. The priests who used it are gone. But the water clock remains a small, pale stone vessel, quietly outlasting everyone and everything it once knew. There is something in that worth sitting with for a moment. The permanence of small, careful things. Here is something strange about Egyptian time that takes a moment to wrap your mind around. In ancient Egypt, not all hours were equal. Remember how we said The Egyptians divided each day into 12 hours, and each night into 12 hours. That sounds simple enough. But think about what happens at the summer solstice, when the days are longest. If you divide a long summer day into 12 equal parts, each hour lasts about 70 minutes. But if you divide a short winter day into 12 equal parts, each hour lasts only about 45 minutes. The same word, the same hour, but a completely different length depending on the season. Egyptian water clocks accounted for this. The craftsmen who carved the interior hour marks knew that they needed different calibrations for different months. Some of the surviving Clepsydra have 12 separates of marks carved inside one for each month of the Egyptian calendar, because the hours genuinely changed in length throughout the year. This is not sloppiness or imprecision. It is a profoundly different relationship with time. The Egyptians were not trying to impose a rigid, mechanical grid onto the natural world. They were observing the natural world and letting time flex and breathe according to the actual behavior of the sun. Summer hours were long and generous. Winter hours were short and spare, just like the light itself. It was only much later centuries after the Romans inherited Egyptian astronomical knowledge that the concept of fixed, equal hours began to take hold. The Romans called them equinoctial hours because they were based on the length of the day at the equinox, when day and night are equal, fixed, unchanging, mechanical. In some ways, that shift marked the beginning of modernity's complicated relationship with time. The moment when we decided that time should be regular, predictable, controlled, rather than something that ebbed and flowed with the seasons. But in the temple courtyards of ancient Karnak, at the water clock in the inner sanctum, in the long meditative watches of the night priest's time, was still alive, still breathing, still moving the way shadows move, slowly, naturally, without urgency. Let us return to the temple. It is now the middle of the night. The courtyard outside is silver with moonlight. The great stone columns cast their own long shadows, pale and quiet on the limestone floor. Somewhere in the desert beyond the temple walls, a nightjar calls once and falls silent. Inside the innermost sanctuary, a lamp burns on a low stone shelf. Its flame barely moves. The air in here is so still, so sealed from the outside world, that the flame stands perfectly vertical, like a tiny golden obelisk. In the corner of the room sits a water clock. It is filled to the brim. A priest filled it at nightfall, just as the last light left the sky. He said a prayer as he filled it, a small invocation to the gods of the night, a request that the hours would pass peacefully, that the rituals would be performed on time. That morning would come as it always had. Now, in the deep dark of the third hour, a junior priest sits near the clock. His job is simple: watch. When the water level reaches the next mark, he will go to the senior priest and announce it. The next ritual will begin. But for now, there is nothing to do but watch. He watches the water drip. A pause. Another drop. A longer pause. The sound is so small in the great silence of the temple that it seems almost imaginary. A soft tick. Not mechanical, nothing as hard or certain as a clock. More like a thought. A gentle, recurring thought. The mind reminding itself that time is passing. The young priest's breathing slows. His eyes grow heavy. The flame barely moves. Drop. Pause. Drop. In the world outside, the stars are wheeling slowly overhead. The constellation the Egyptians called the Big Dipper, which they imagined as the foreleg of a bull, has moved an inch further across the sky since the priest last checked. The North Star still holds its position, fixed and certain, the anchor point around which everything else turns. The desert is cold now. The sand that radiated heat all day is releasing it into the dark sky. If you were outside, you could hold your hand just above the sand and feel it a faint, lingering warmth, like a body that has only just cooled. But inside the temple, the temperature does not change, has not changed. The thick stone walls hold the air at a constant, gentle cool. The same temperature it was at noon, the same temperature it will be at dawn. Inside the temple, the ordinary fluctuations of the world cannot enter. It is, in this way, a place outside of ordinary time. Or perhaps it is a place where time moves differently. Drop. The young priest breathes. The flame is perfectly still. And the water falls, one small patient drop at a time, marking the hours of a night that is 3,000 years ago, and also, somehow, exactly now. Let us spend a few gentle moments on the actual science of what the Egyptians were observing, because understanding it makes it more beautiful, not less. The Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours. That is the fundamental fact beneath all of timekeeping. As the Earth turns, the sun appears to move across our sky, rising in the east, crossing overhead, setting in the west. But of course, the sun isn't moving. The Earth is. We are all, right now, in motion, spinning on an axis tilted at 23.5 degrees, orbiting the sun at approximately 67,000 miles per hour. The planet beneath you is never still. It has not been still for 4.5 billion years. When an Egyptian priest watched the shadow of an obelisk move across the stone courtyard, he was watching the rotation of the Earth, though of course he did not know to call it that. To him, it was the sun god Ra traveling across the sky in his sacred bark. Each day, Ra would sail from east to west through the heavens. Each night, he would descend into the underworld and make the journey back, fighting the serpent Apophis, and emerging victorious at dawn. The science and the story were the same thing. And in this, the ancient Egyptians were doing something deeply human, taking an enormous, impersonal, mechanical process and weaving it into narrative, making it meaningful, making it something worth watching. The shadow on the stone was not just physics. It was the breath of a god. Even if you do not share that belief, there is something worth holding on to in the approach. The Egyptians looked at the sky with attention and reverence. They watched, for generations, with the patience of people who understood that observation itself was a form of prayer. They were right about the shadow moving. They were right about the stars. They were right about the patterns repeating year after year. Their measurements were accurate enough that our modern 24-hour day descends directly from their observations. We are still, in a very real sense, keeping time the way an Egyptian priest kept time. We are all still watching the same shadow move. To understand how the Egyptians tracked the night hours, we need to spend a little time looking up. The Egyptian sky was a different sky from ours, not different physically, but different culturally. Every constellation, every prominent star, had a name, a story, a deity attached to it. The sky was not empty space. It was a populated world, as rich and organized as any city on Earth. The Egyptians were particularly attentive to a group of stars they called the decans. The word decan comes from the Greek, but the Egyptian concept predates the Greeks by over 1,000 years. The decans were 36 groups of stars, one for each 10-degree segment of the celestial equator, and one for each 10-day period of the Egyptian calendar, which was divided into 36 groups of 10 days, plus 5 extra days. Here is what made the decans useful for nighttime timekeeping. Each decan star group rose on the eastern horizon at a slightly different time of year just before dawn, in what astronomers call a heliacal rising. By noting which decan star rose, the beginning of each night, an astronomer could determine the time of year. And by watching which decan crossed the meridian overhead at any given moment during the night, a priest could determine what hour it was. Egyptian coffin lids from around 2100 BCE are decorated with what are called diagonal star clocks, essentially star charts organized into tables, showing which decan was visible at each hour of each night throughout the year. Some Egyptologists believe these were not merely decorative, they were functional, painted on the inside of a coffin lid so that the deceased could orient themselves in the afterlife. Even in death, the Egyptians wanted to know what time it was. This tells us something important about how central timekeeping was to their spiritual worldview. Time was not just practical, it was sacred. Knowing the hour meant knowing where you were in the great cosmic order. It meant being present, correctly, in the unfolding of the universe. Imagine lying on your back in the warm Egyptian desert, looking up at the stars, knowing the name of each one, knowing which hour their rising announced, feeling the slow rotation of the world beneath you. Not rushed, not anxious, just present. Part of something enormous and unhurried and beautiful. Everything we have talked about tonight, the obelisks, the shadow clocks, the water clocks, the decan stars, did not stay in Egypt. Knowledge, like water, finds a way to flow. Greek philosophers and mathematicians traveled to Egypt and were taught. Thales of Miletus, often called the first Greek philosopher, is said to have studied in Egypt. Pythagoras reportedly spent time there. Herodotus certainly did, and wrote about Egyptian astronomy and timekeeping with obvious admiration. The Greeks took Egyptian astronomical knowledge and built on it. They invented trigonometry in part to better understand the movement of heavenly bodies. Hipparchus, in the 2nd century BCE, compiled star catalogs that relied heavily on Egyptian observations going back centuries. When the Romans came, they took the Greek knowledge, which had taken the Egyptian knowledge, and carried it westward across their empire. The Roman scholar Pliny the Elder described the Egyptian Clepsydra in detail. Roman engineers installed water clocks in public places across the empire so that citizens could know the hour. Julius Caesar, who famously became romantically entangled with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, brought an Egyptian-influenced calendar reform to Rome in 46 BCE. The Julian calendar, which Caesar created with the help of Egyptian astronomers, established the 365-day year with a leap year every 4 years. We still use a version of that calendar today. Our Gregorian calendar, the one on your wall, The one on your phone is a direct descendant of the Egyptian astronomical tradition. Our 24-hour day is the Egyptian 24-hour day. Our 60-minute hour traces back through Mesopotamian and Egyptian mathematics. Even our habit of dividing the sky into 360 degrees comes in part from Egyptian and Babylonian astronomical observations. When you glance at the clock tonight and see that it is almost midnight, you are looking at something that began in an Egyptian temple, quartered thousands of years ago, with a shadow on stone. The shadow is still moving. It has never stopped. There is one more small, beautiful detail about the Egyptian water clock that is worth knowing before we go to sleep. The rate at which water flows through a hole depends on the pressure of the water above it. When a vessel is full, the water pressure is high and the water flows faster. As the vessel empties, the pressure drops and the water flows more slowly. This means that a simple Egyptian water clock was not perfectly accurate. The first hour after filling would be measured too quickly. The last hour before the vessel was empty would be measured too slowly. Egyptian craftsmen knew this. They compensated for it by making the vessels slightly conical wider at the top and narrower at the bottom, so that as the water level fell and the pressure decreased, there was also less water to flow out, and the two effects partially canceled each other. It was not perfect. It was not meant to be perfect. It was good enough, carefully enough, attentively enough made that it could serve the gods and the priests and the rituals of a civilization for over 1,000 years. There is a lesson in that. Not everything needs to be perfect. It needs to be cared for, attended to, made with intention, and used with patience. The slight imprecision of an Egyptian water clock was not a failure. It was an acknowledgement that time is alive, variable, responsive to the world. That the flow of hours is not a mechanical thing, but an organic one. Some nights the water flowed a little faster, some nights a little slower. The priests adjusted. They observed. They noted. They were not slaves to the clock. The clock served them. And in that quiet sanctuary, with the flame barely moving, and the desert cold, and the stars turning overhead, the water dripped its gentle way through the night, marking the hours one by one, asking nothing of the person listening except attention. Just attention, and breath, and rest. We have traveled a long way tonight. We have stood in temple courtyards and watched shadows move. We have looked up at stars through the warm dark of an Egyptian night and learned their names. We have sat beside clay vessels and listened to the soft, patient drip of water marking the hours. And perhaps, along the way, something in you has relaxed a little. Perhaps you have remembered, as the Egyptians knew, that time is not your enemy. It is not something to outrun or defeat or manage into submission. It is simply the medium in which your life moves, the way water is the medium in which a fish moves. You cannot hold time. You cannot save it up. You cannot spend it more wisely than you already do. In the simple act of being present to whatever is happening now. The Egyptians understood this. They built it into their language, into the words Djet and Neheh. They built it into their monuments. They carved it into the stone walls of their water clocks. Time is both the passing hour and the eternal cycle. Both the drip of water and the turning of stars. Both the single breath you are taking right now and the 4 billion years that led to this moment. You are very small, and you are very much a part of something vast and slow and beautiful. Let that thought settle now. Let your body grow heavy and still. Let your breathing slow, the way breathing slows at the edge of sleep. Somewhere in Cairo, in the Egyptian Museum, a small, pale alabaster water clock sits in a glass case. The hole at its base has been empty for 3,000 years. It does not drip anymore. But if you were to fill it, if some careful curator were to fill it with cool water, it would begin again, patient as ever. The same marks on the same ancient walls, the same hours. That continuity is real. You are part of it. And now, it is time for your own kind of rest. Let the shadow fall where it will. Let the water find its level. And let sleep come, as it always does, in its own slow and patient time. Good night. Sleep well. The stars are still turning. You are safe in the long, unhurried arms of time.